Good morning. Morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. If we haven't gotten a chance to meet yet, I'm Eric Olson. I'm the Director of Extension Lakes. We are pleased as punch to have you all here today. Welcome to the 2025 Wisconsin Lakes Partnership Convention, Lakes and Rivers Partnership Convention. Just a couple of housekeeping things that I have to do before we start introducing our keynote, and some people will start trickling in still. So if you do come in, you can find a table where there's coffee as well as rolls. So please help yourself to coffee and rolls. If you're a drinker of decaf, we chose not to put decaf on all the tables because not many people do drink decaf. But in the back corner over there, next to the word habitat, you'll find some carafes with the decaf coffee. Our theme this year, as you hopefully have noticed, is the power of words working for our waters. Words can be extremely powerful things, especially when we all use them to advocate for our waters. By raising awareness, promoting conservation efforts, and crafting compelling messages, words can inspire and drive positive change to protect our water resources for future generations. So our ask of you is to take what you learn here at the convention, write down some notes, go back to your communities, and communicate this important information to your communities, to your local government, and to others. First timers. There is 150 people here who are here for the very first time. Can any of them sort of raise your hand and identify? Woo! Thank you for joining us. We strive to reach new people every year and welcome new audiences as part of our Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers Partnership. It takes all of us working together to care for our lakes, and the more people and the more diverse perspectives that come to the table, the better we are for doing that. Thank you for being here and making our partnership stronger. If you look around, you'll find people who have a staff badge, and there's other people who have, what's the word, Amy, for the other helpers? Mentors. So if you're confused or you want something explained, find either a staff or a mentor and they will answer your questions. I also want to give a Wisconsin hello to our virtual participants. We are broadcasting this session and some of the other breakout sessions live. This is part of our attempt to make this an accessible event. And we're doing this to try to reach people who for some reason cannot be here in person. So we're glad that our virtual participants are with us today and tomorrow. We have people moderating that discussion, and when we get into after the plenary, if there's questions, we'll include questions from the virtual audience. This event is brought to you, put together by the Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers Partnership. So what is the Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers Partnership? As you can see on this slide, there are statewide pieces of the partnership, and that includes kind of our main benefactor and host, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. That includes UW Extension, the UW Division of Extension at UW-Madison, and their Water Action Volunteers program. That includes our statewide nonprofit partner, Wisconsin Lakes, and that includes our office, Extension Lakes. This event just would not happen without their involvement. And now, because you're here, you are also part of the Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers Partnership. So thank you for joining us. I also want to thank our sponsors. This is a good event, but it becomes a great event because of these sponsors. These are the people that kick in some money to make things possible, like bringing in plenary speakers, like the free beer that some people enjoyed last night. All those things, and even the quality of the food that we present is courtesy of our sponsors. Can we please give them a round of applause? Just one more note I want to point out that our virtual participants, again, use the chat in the Zoom if you have questions. Next slide here. We do want to recognize that this event and any event in Wisconsin is happening on land that really isn't ours. This is land that has been taken from people who were here well before us, and were here for generations. And it's one thing to acknowledge that, to use these words to say this land has been taken from people. It's another thing to try and translate that into action. A big part of what the Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers Partnership does is education and outreach. And the main action tools we have are to shape agendas and to kind of set the tone of the discourse. And today you're going to get a little bit of flavor of that, kind of what it means to try to, not quite atone, but to try to educate people and make up for some of the injustices of the past. So please join me in this morning's journey through some different learning experiences. We're asking some of you to stretch your minds a little bit and to consider things that maybe haven't been considered before. We also start this event typically with a video production. We like to share sort of audio-visual grandeur to try to set the tone again and to try and relax people. This is a learning environment, and you're going to learn best if you're calm and at ease. This digital production this year is actually not one of our productions. Amy Kowalski, my helper behind the curtain, got a bit of a break this year, and we made a really fortuitous connection. There's a woman at UW-Madison. She's a graduate student, and she's been working on wild rice issues. She's up at the Trout Lake Station a lot of time, but she's also down in Madison, and she took it upon herself to create a video to share some stories and to let people speak for themselves. So I'm not going to take any more of her time because she's here. The person who made this video is going to introduce it and kind of explain where this came from. Her name is Sejan Quayle, and I'll ask her to the stage now. Sejan?
So, Buju, Sejan Najagana, Shawinakaz, Menominike, Kwe Dash, and Dunjojibwe Winnakaz, Mungna Dodem, Gama Squabakong, and Dunjaba. So I just gave my introduction in Anishinaabe Moen, which is the Ojibwe language, and I said, hi, hello everyone. My English name is Sejan. My native name is actually She Harvest Wild Rice Woman. I'm Loon Clan, and I'm of the Red Cliff Nation. I'm super honored to be able to speak before Dr. Leonard today, and I'm also just honored to be able to be here and share the stories and the voices of the people from Waswaganing or Lac du Flambeau who have, really shaped the knowledge that I hold today. So, Nimi Gwichi Wendum, I'm really grateful to be here, and I hope you all enjoy and take something away about Menomin or wild rice. Miigwech.
My viewpoint is that it's a relative. It's something that we need to steward and take care of because it takes care of us at the end of the day. Like, something that the Creator has given us in order to live, in order to be well.
One of the best natural foods that I know of.
It has its own spirit, its own life.
Obviously, it's a food source, but seeing it as like the living being that it is.
That nutritional grain that we all need. I mean, it's that medicine.
Wild rice was one of the reasons the Ojibwe ancestors settled into this area was the prophet from that I was told was we came out of the northeast, migrated around the Great Lakes region, and we had to stop, and we found, the prophet said, a place where food grows on water. So got into the Great Lakes area. This is where that was.
Phenomenon is very important to me because it plays a vital role in our ancestral diet and provides essential nutrients and sustenance that we need, and it's a very important food in our ceremonies and our cultural practices that we use for pretty much everything.
Going out and harvesting Monoman and being a part of that entire process has really been a part of my healing as an Anishinaabe person. Be out on the water and knocking rice or push pulling for someone, to be able to just hear that serenity of that ambiance, just the rice kind of singing in the wind, hear all those little birds and everything. And like part of the harvesting and like that process is constantly holding the respect for that plant.
You know, when you go out on water, you know, you off your asema, you harvest in a good way. And, you know, not only is Monoman listening to you and watching you, you know, that eagle spirit's watching you, that fish spirit is watching you, and making sure you do it in a good way. And, you know, we're always told to offer some of your harvest back. Like if you go, you know, going through a rice field, head back in, you see a bare spot, just go through a couple handfuls in a bare spot to try to get that reseeded in that area. And, you know, just giving back.
Reciprocity is necessary for a plant relative that has been in decline since the onset of settler colonialism. The historical decline in Monoman came from the extensive manipulation of waterways in order to transport tree relatives from northern Wisconsin to growing cities of the time like Chicago. The widening of rivers and the raising and lowering of water levels through implementation of dams took away an unfathomable amount of Monoman habitat.
Come to find out, there was a whole lot more.
Yeah.
A whole lot more. Unreal. With the decline of rice that we're experiencing for the past 10 years or even longer, we're probably down to maybe an eighth of what it used to be like.
To me, it's like a central characteristic of who we are as Anishinaabe people. So if we don't have the rice, if we don't have that practice, if we don't have that for, you know, ceremonies or feasts, that it kind of is a drop in our identity. It's really, you know, key to our identity, and, you know, why we came here and stayed here.
It's a creation story. It's been a part of our tradition and history. So it's a strong root and plant that we can focus back to show our sovereignty, show the importance and significance of a being to us that will sustain us. It's going to show us by its declining population or types of the health of our Mother Earth, and what is going to be the health of us if we don't do what we have to protect it. It's a sign.
Say, just don't take it for granted, because if you do, it'll probably go away. It has a life of its own that evolves, you know, 365 days out of the year, you know. So we want to make sure that you know, that part isn't forgotten.
Gives us something to keep fighting for, and that ties us all together.
You know, continue to respect and honor it, and don't take it for granted.
It's life. It gives us a purpose that hopefully in the future gives a lot more people a purpose.
It's part of the family legacy, I guess. I mean, my grandma and grandpa, when they were young, and waking up early in the morning, packing lunch, going out there racing all day till sunset. So just wanting to kind of continue that sort of legacy that I hear about. That's really important to me.
I'm going to say miigwech to Sejin. That's beautiful. Thank you. And now it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the morning, Dr. Kelsey Leonard. Dr. Leonard is a water scientist, legal scholar, policy expert, and enrolled citizen of the Shinnecock Nation. The Shinnecock people's ancestral home was on what we call Eastern Long Island. The word Shinnecock roughly translates to people of the stony shore. Her work focuses on Indigenous water justice and its climatic, territorial, and governance underpinnings for our shared sustainable future. She was the first Native American woman to earn a science degree from the University of Oxford, and she went on to earn a law degree from Duquesne University and a PhD from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. She is now on the faculty at the University of Waterloo in Ontario. Please give a warm Wisconsin welcome to Dr. Kelsey Leonard.
Hey, I think everyone can hear me all right. How are we doing? Sound test? Good? People in the back? I got hands. That's wonderful. Akwe Winikasak, hello, good day, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you. And thank you so much to Eric and the whole conference planning team for inviting me to be here with you all, and to all of you for showing up, especially this early morning session. So I'm really excited to be able to share a bit of my work across a few different hats I wear, as you heard from Eric's introduction. I am a professor at the University of Waterloo, so I do science and research in the space of Indigenous water governance and more broader climate adaptation science. But I also wear some policy hats, which you'll come to learn throughout our conversation today. So we're really going to think today about what does it mean for lakes and rivers to have rights. Before we do that, as Eric noted, I am an enrolled citizen of the Shinnecock Nation. And as I've had the fortunate opportunity to be in conversation and visit with humans all around the world, we're a little challenged with geography. So I always like to orient folks to where I'm from. As Eric said, my nation and my territory is on the east end of what's currently known as Long Island, New York. It's called Long Island for a reason. It's very long. So what you see on the map here is just half of the eastern portion of the island, which is our traditional territory as Shinnecock people. And for me, I like to orient folks to where I'm from, my nation, my community, because I often get asked the question, what made you want to be a water scientist? And it's taken me a few years, I think, to be able to have the confidence in this answer I'm going to share with you. Because a lot of it was about how my journey as a scientist and as a human on this planet, trying to understand my connection to other humans, other non-humans, and the water itself. And so what I've actually come to know is that Shinnecock, as Eric said, in our language means people of the stony shore. And so I think our ancestors had an imbued responsibility in calling themselves that and calling their descendants, of which I am, Shinnecock, because they said that in calling ourselves that, we have a responsibility to protect that shore, to protect that space where land and water connect. And so for me, that's how I see my role as a scientist and some of the work that I will share with you today. If you're less familiar with Eastern tribal nations like my own, we're often known for traditionally being whalers, for being bay people. Anybody out here like a good clam chowder? That comes from our people, from our territory. But what you all may be more familiar with, which is also connected to clam chowder, but I digress, is something called wampum. Have you heard of wampum before? Show of hands? Some head nods? Okay. I'm really glad that you've heard of that. And oftentimes in the Great Lakes you have, because of the many storied wampum agreements and treaty belts that we have here that predate the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty. These are the first international water treaties we have in this part of the world. But what many folks don't realize is that wampum is made from mollusks that are harvested only from certain areas of Eastern coastal nations. And so my nation is one of those nations that harvests quahogs and whelks, two types of mollusks that are carved into wampum beads that made their way to the Great Lakes and formed into treaty belts all around this region. So I guess a little bit of my story is also kind of like a wampum bead. I was made in the East, and I traveled here to hopefully make sure that we can live up to those covenants and those responsibilities and polishing those commitments across my lifetime and hopefully future lifetimes so we protect the water. So that's a little bit about me, but I also want to acknowledge not only my thanks to the conference organizers for having me here, but to the many nations who allow for all of us to be here today, who have stewarded and continue to steward these lands and waters. That beautiful film that we all just watched, it really set us up for such a wonderful conversation that we'll have in a little moment about Mahnomen, about the ways in which we can protect it in light of all of these pressing issues that were raised in the film. And the folks who are on the ground doing that amazing work right now are some of the ones that you saw in the video, and all of the many nations pictured here across what we currently know as Wisconsin. So I extend my true and sincere heartfelt thanks for the wonderful work that they do. And as many of you in this room, as environmental folks, as conservation folks, you do thankless jobs. You do things that you don't often get a lot of thanks for. And as Indigenous peoples, it's really important to us culturally to give thanks, to give gratitude, not only to other humans, but to the natural world itself. And so I hope as we think about the theme of this conference, the power of words, that you also think of the power of gratitude, the power of giving thanks, and what that word or those types of words can mean to the work you do and to the entities and beings that you protect. So, in understanding that, I love to share the work of a wonderful colleague, Dr. Robin Wall-Kimmerer. This is from Braiding Sweetgrass, which many of you may know, New York Times bestseller, all of these wonderful things. And in it, she says, knowing that you love the earth changes you. It activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. And ultimately, that's a bit of what we're here to discuss, both in my conversation with you this morning, but throughout the course of your time here. How are you building and restoring and restoring, telling new stories, seeding stories about the connections that you have to the natural world? And how might we be able to do that through an ethic of love? See, sometimes in the scientific world, we chase after something called objectivity. Now, there's a really wonderful Indigenous scholar, Vine Deloria Jr., who would say that that's a myth. Every individual person that comes into scientific practice brings their life experience with them. They bring their background. They bring all of that storied understanding and memories of how they've interacted with the world to shape the types of questions they ask, the way they respond to those questions, the hypotheses they build. And so perhaps science doesn't necessarily need to be objective. Perhaps what we should be chasing for is a science based in love about and working towards our connection to the natural world. So for me, that work has stemmed from the knowledge that I've been gifted from water walkers around the world. And in particular, I was very fortunate to be in conversation and to be mentored, to just be gifted space with one of, I think, the most beautiful human beings that ever walked our planet. Her name was Josephine Mandeman, and she would say that we're all born of water. We're all connected with the water. We're all related in that way. Even though we're not related by blood, we're related by water. So water is very precious for us. And I think that's what brings all of you in this room together. For today, and maybe beyond today, and maybe before today, you're all relatives. You are related because the water connects you. The water of these territories, this space has brought you here into this room. And oftentimes, what we also hear in our communities is that water is our first medicine. It nurtures us in the womb. And then we have waters that break when we're birthed onto this planet. So we all have a natal connection to water. But unfortunately, somewhere along the way, we lose that connection. We forget to polish it. We forget to restore that commitment, that love, that witnessing, the conversations that are required to maintain relationality. But not everyone has lost that connection. Many of you in this room maintain it every day through the work that you do, through your opportunities that you take with your family to go out and enjoy and visit with water. And so I think everyone in this room has a distinct love for water, and particularly a certain body or bodies of water that we all call the Great Lakes. So that other hat I wear outside of being a university professor is I also sit on the Water Quality Board for the International Joint Commission. And I want to share with you some results that have come out of the 2024 Great Lakes Regional Poll, because I think it's also going to be very informative of how we transition to the next portion of our conversation today about, hey, should lakes and rivers have rights? Well, maybe the poll will help us to guide our answer to that question. So this bit of slides are IJC approved. I will tell you at the point where we've transitioned to it just being Kelsey's opinions. Have to preface that. So I've been really fortunate to sit with the IJC for many years now, and I wasn't a part of the first poll that was done in 2015, but I joined in 2017, and since then, I've been a part of every regional poll that we've led throughout the Great Lakes, which is a public opinion poll about what everyday citizens across the lakes are thinking and feeling and understanding in terms of science and news and media about the lakes. And so for 2024, we did a phone poll with a random sample of about 4,550 residents around the Great Lakes region. I'm also really proud of the fact that through our leadership, we've ensured that this poll has about 10% of respondents that identify as Indigenous, First Nations, Tribal Nations, or Métis. It's actually the first regional poll in all of Canada or the United States to have that type of data available and to have that data available about water. So I'm not going to be able to share everything with you today about the poll. So you can scan some of the QR codes. There'll be many as we go through the presentation. Open up your phone, your camera, put it up there. It will give you the little link, and then you click, and then it takes you to it. So you can store these resources for later. So what did the poll tell us? So first off, we started the poll, as I mentioned, in 2015. And so we always ask this question. We have some longitudinal data now. How important is it to protect the Great Lakes? And specifically for the water quality of the Great Lakes. And so in 2015, you can see 85%, 88%, 90%, 94%. So every year we are, or every time we've done the poll, we are seeing an increase in greater consciousness of Great Lakes residents wanting to protect the Great Lakes and particularly wanting to protect the water quality of the lakes. So we also then have asked folks, what about the lake that you live around? So I've only picked two, kind of preferential to Wisconsin, Lake Michigan. And we asked questions around, do you feel, is it safe to swim, drink, and fish? And unfortunately, Lake Michigan was pretty split. And you're probably thinking in your head, well, why is that? Why was there this split? Well, Lake Michigan's a pretty big lake. There's a lot of different jurisdictions around that lake, Wisconsin, Michigan, other Canadian provinces. And so there's a lot of diversity in terms of how we might be making decisions about how to protect the water. And so I think, conjecture, not a formal analysis, that's probably why we're seeing such disparity in the context of, do people feel that Lake Michigan is safe to swim, drink, and fish? So when we think about Lake Superior, which is coming up next, we've got that people think the state of its water quality is good and feel it's staying the same or improving. So we see a totally different vision of public perception on Lake Superior. 92% think it's safe for swimming. 86% for drinking, 86% for fish. And so you might ask yourself, for the northern portions of Wisconsin, does that, maybe some of you are from that part of the state, maybe these results resonate with you. And maybe these results don't resonate for you. That's what I love about the poll, is it allows for us to have greater inquiry and questions about why are these responses coming up and what might we do to activate around them. So we also, as I mentioned, polled Indigenous respondents. And so for Indigenous peoples, we see something a little bit different. Do threats facing Great Lakes health make you concerned about fish, plant, or wildlife species of cultural importance, like monomen? And we see that overall, more than a majority of respondents are really concerned about the impacts to cultural species of importance for their communities. Okay. So we also asked Indigenous respondents, how safe do you think it is to eat fish from the Great Lakes you live closest to? And overwhelmingly, there was a lot of respondents, particularly Métis and tribal nations, a bit of a distinction between our imagined borders, that fish consumption is of real concern, and that 52% of tribal nations do not feel that that fish is safe for consumption. And there's a lot of studies, other scientific studies about this. We've got the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission here, and they've got a wonderful booth, and their team has done some really amazing work around fish consumption and safety. As well, the Status of Tribes and Climate Change report, the STAC report, was just released yesterday. You can Google that and have it come up. And they talk about the impacts to cultural species of importance like monomen, to fish consumption rates and issues being further exacerbated by climate change. And there's some Great Lakes regional content in there. So when we think about the impacts to Indigenous peoples in our region, we are seeing that from a public perception, as peoples ourselves, there are disparities that are prevalent. So where do we go from here? Well, we asked folks, does your interaction with nature and water provide benefits for you, right? Because remember what Robin Wall Kimmerer said, if you have that love, if you can transform your relationship from being transactional or a one-way street into a sacred bond, then you're willing to fight for it. You're willing to protect it. And so that's what we've seen in the poll, is that folks are excited about the benefits. They see the benefits of nature and water. They see that it provides happiness, life satisfaction, contributes to their overall mental health as well as well-being. So are we doing all right then? We know that it has all of these benefits for us. How are our municipalities, government agencies working to fulfill their responsibilities to protect? Well, I think it could be a little better. You take the results for your own grain of salt, but there's room for improvement. I like to say these are growth areas. The numbers may not be exactly where we'd want them to be in terms of positivity, but that just means that we have a lot of opportunity for change and transformation. So we also asked folks who should be responsible for protecting Great Lakes water quality, and whether that's indigenous governments, everyone, local governments, federal governments, state, provincial. There was obviously a lot of emphasis on federal and state and provincial. Now, with our current state of the world, we might be leaning more towards state provincial governments. This was done in 2024, mind you. So all of that is to say that we also asked folks, how can we activate? What actions would you most likely take to protect the Great Lakes? And what we saw is that folks are actually pretty eager to volunteer, to contact an official, and to sign a petition. Also very interesting, I think we've got a lot of citizen scientists out there because they're eager to water sample. So for all of you citizen science organizations, take that to to your funders, perhaps. Go download this information of why we need citizen scientists. So all of that, again, is shaping how we think about the future of our world, the future of climate change. And we asked folks, thinking ahead to 2040, what are your visions for the Great Lake region? What will it be like? And some said that it will be about protected by governments, 32%, not the greatest. They said it will be, 36% said it would be sustainable. 44% said prosperous. So there's, that's not bad. And then others, though, they emphasized some concern. And we saw a high percentage around the perception, right? Again, public perception of the potential for more polluted lakes and conflict over water, especially through the exacerbation of climate change. So what do we do when we've got fear about war, conflict, water fights? I mean, we've been there. It happened in the early 2000s. It's really been the story of this continent fighting over water. And maybe the story needs to change towards fighting for water. So that's the idea. There's something wrong with our status quo. What is wrong with our status quo? We all need to be asking ourselves that. There's probably too many reasons right in our heads right now of what's going wrong. But what we have seen, even before 2025, is that our legal system allows for the destruction of nature. We've legalized it in many instances. So how have our laws legalized the destruction of nature? Well, we allow for things to be done to the natural world, to be harmed towards water, up to a certain threshold, so that there's not so much degradation that it would harm humans, but enough so that our other human activities can still persist. And unfortunately, when we made some of our environmental laws in the 1960s and 70s, we were responding to crises. We were being reactive. And we made things that were important and responsive to those times. But our times have changed. Climate change is drastically different than it was 50 years ago. And our laws, even though they were good then, they still have allowed for the destruction of nature, where we've seen 68% of animal populations lost in 50 years, where we have 2/3 of the longest flowing rivers no longer flowing freely, and where half of coral reefs around our planet have been destroyed. Now, again, it's not a story solely of doom and gloom. In each of these categories, we have seen areas of regeneration and restoration and rebirth, but we need so much more for the planet to heal. So how do we catalyze that movement? Well, one option, as I will share with you today, is to move from environmental law to earth law. See, earth law recognizes, honors, and protects nature's inherent right to exist, thrive, and evolve. And what we are seeking through this type of legal movement is an opportunity to create a future in which humans and nature thrive together. So, what are the origins of earth law? How did this jurisprudential model come to be? Well, it's both a departure from environmental law and a new context for its extension. It's saying there are some things from our environmental law history that we need to leave in the past. But there are some things about our environmental law legacy that wholeheartedly need to move forward with us. So both a departure and an extension. It also challenges the ontology of separation. See, our legal system evolved from localized, customary laws that were shaped by a modern Western legal system that was based on separating humans from the rest of nature, based on man dominating nature. We think of the Enlightenment thinkers and all of that context that went into this idea that man is the dominating figure over nature. That shaped our law for many hundreds of years. And so when we're thinking about Earth law, we're trying to imagine a transformation that allows for us to regenerate over the next few generations of our life together. So in 2020, the first law textbook on Earth law was published. It's available for anyone to purchase if you'd like, but a second edition is coming out soon, so maybe you might want to wait for that one. Earth law is often called ecocentric law. It's an emerging body of law for protecting, restoring, and stabilizing the functional interdependency of Earth's life and life support systems. So what does that mean in practice? Well, I like to tell folks to think of Earth law as a tree. There are current branches on that tree, and there will be branches that will fall off, and there will be new branches that will grow, maybe from the spark of innovation of folks sitting in this room today. But for right now, some of the branches that you may be familiar with are the crime of ecocide, animal rights, guardianship for nature, rights of future generations, like the Juliana case, unfortunately, recent bad news there, but still global news of folks fighting for the rights of future generation, like the Swiss grandmothers that won their case last year. Human environmental rights, like the right to a healthy environment and the human right to water, and things like atmospheric trust litigation. But two that we're going to focus in on today that you may be very familiar with are rights of nature and Indigenous law. So Earth law is both a jurisprudential model, but also a movement. We've seen it emerge in countries all around the world, including the United States, through constitutional amendments, court decisions, local ordinances, and much of this movement, unlike maybe other environmental movements throughout our history, although there's probably a case for many of them, this one is very much Indigenous-led, and Indigenous thought leadership advances much of the cases, successful cases we've seen around the world. Some of the most renowned are the constitutional amendment of the state of Ecuador, right, the national state that was done in 2008 to recognize rights of nature in their constitution. We've also seen the Whanganui River in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which was recognized as and affirmed as being a legal person in 2017 through both the New Zealand government and the iwi, the Indigenous nation of that territory. And so this rapidly growing movement is not just led by governments, but organizations, movement builders like the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, the UN Harmony with Nature initiative. So the United Nations has an arm of its work that also addresses this context. And then we also have the IUCN, which has a Rights of Nature task force. So my colleagues and I were really fortunate. We saw this burgeoning movement of Earth law and rights of nature initiatives. And so, like most scientists did during COVID, we built a data portal. And we're really excited about it, though. So you can scan this QR code, and it will take you to the portal. You can search for all of the Earth law initiatives around the world that have been added to our database, thousands of them. You can search by political jurisdiction. So you want to see what's everything that's been done in the United States. You can search by that. Or something I'm also very proud of is we did something where you can search by biome or ecological actor. What are all of the rivers or lakes that have received rights around our planet? And so this is a little bit of what the data portal looks like. So each of those circles with the number indicated is the number of initiatives that exist in that jurisdiction or biome. It will then show you different types of eco-jurisprudential law or earth law that have emerged, whether it be rights of nature, indigenous law, maybe it's animal rights, as you can see here. And so a really amazing tool for your work on the ground and for your advocacy. So when you see a case emerge for the recognition of the inherent rights of a natural being, ultimately it is trying to overcome some challenges that exist within our current legal system. So some of these challenges include property law. Unfortunately, in our current system, we have deemed that nature belongs to the owner of the property that the nature occupies. And so this movement is trying to reimagine that and shift that to other possibilities of nature not being owned by a property owner or not being owned, but just inherently having its own rights to exist. It also attempts, this movement attempts, to address issues of standing. So standing is a legal term. And what it means is the interests of nature and the posterity of future generations are not represented in law in their own right, but only as resources for use by legally recognized persons. So we need to somehow reimagine nature to either be a legally recognized person or have some other measure or mechanism to have standing, to be heard, have its grievance heard, that's what standing means, in a court of law. So that's also what this jurisprudential model tries to do. So address property law, address standing, and then the last one is guardianship. So there is no established mechanism in the law to permit one to represent and speak for nature or future generations to defend and protect their interests. So what folks don't always realize is that the first step may be recognizing that a natural entity is a legal person or has rights, but then there are subsequent steps. There's a whole slew of enforcement and implementation that has to occur, including a process of establishing guardianship. Who gets to speak for nature? And I always say that that is localized and context specific. There is no one size fits all. There is no formula of, okay, here's all the people that need to be there and be able to speak for nature. No, it's about having conversation. It's about restoring that sacred bond. And in that process of having those conversations, bringing everyone into the forum to discuss how to best represent nature, that's where we've seen the most strongest guardianship bodies evolve. And so what is this transformation? What are we seeing happening? Well, remember what we said, what's wrong with the status quo? Well, right now, humans and corporations have rights or standing, so why not nature? So ecocentric law, earth law, promotes that shift, that nature and future generations have rights and standing. Humans and nature are, the status quo often says that humans and nature are separate, that nature is a resource. We talk a lot this week and today about the power of words. What would it mean if we stopped referring to nature, water, as a resource, but more as a relative, as you heard in the film earlier today, Monoman as a relative, water as a relative, that humans and nature are part of an interconnected web of life. And, oh, there we go, we'll go back one more. And then, so the goal ultimately for the status quo is less degradation. That worked when rivers were on fire and cities were consumed by smog, but maybe we can put the bar a little higher in 2025. Let's think about what it would look like to build out systems of reciprocity and regeneration, move away from anthropocentrism towards ecocentrism. And this isn't that revolutionary in the sense that folks are already doing this work, have been doing this work for decades, and now it's just an opportunity for us to mobilize and build on the momentum. So, in the context of rights of nature, give that a moment. There we go. When we think about rights of nature, it's nature has rights, it's about changing the paradigm, and it's about addressing the root cause of environmental destruction we see on our planet today. And so we already see this being adopted at international levels. I removed the domestic for today because nobody wants to talk about that. So at the CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, at the Kunming Montreal Global Diversity Framework meeting in 2022, the framework actually provides support for the rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth, and ecocentrism. So that is a tool that you can use to bolster your work. The IUCN as well, again, has their Rights of Nature Task Force, has it as a focal point in decision making. We also have an amazing special rapporteur at the UN of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. They are the special rapporteur on the right to a healthy environment, and they have been very active in emboldening and welcoming Earth law context into their reports and framing of international law through the human rights lens. And then we also have the UN Harmony with Nature initiative. So as you're thinking about this process of, well, how do I engage in Earth law? Think back to the Great Lakes poll. How do I build those volunteers? How do I contact my local official? Well, perhaps working with folks at an international scale, maybe some of your entities might go to those conferences and convenings and events through the UN. But even at a local level or whatever scale works for you, we all can be committed to advancing Indigenous rights, especially in these troublesome times. I was talking to one of your colleagues earlier today, and there have been numerous Bureau of Indian Affairs offices that have closed throughout the United States and even here in Wisconsin. So tribal nations now more than ever, if you've said that you're an ally, they need allies. They need allies in these times, and gosh, probably everyone in this room needs a good ally in these times. And so together, we can be thinking about how do we advance Indigenous rights. We have international law through the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I love to lead with Article 3. You may, after today, be interested in some of my work and read some of my literature on Indigenous water justice, on water back and water research sovereignty. It may have applicability to the work that you do for protection of the lakes. But core to all of that research about water is Article 3, that Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, we freely determine our political status and freely pursue our economic, social, and cultural development. Embedded within that article is our preeminent sovereign and inherent right to protect, govern, and make decisions about water, our relative. And so I want to share with you as we move towards the end of today and open up for some questions, rights and responsibilities, pathways forward. Who's out there doing the good work, and what are some models that perhaps we could be amplifying, adopting, and moving forward? So in Canada, we have the first river recognized in 2021 by a joint initiative of the Innu First Nation and a regional Quebecois municipality. It is such an amazing model because they spent many years in conversation to co-develop the process and co-develop the procedure for implementing their jurisdictional authority to recognize this river's rights. And in doing so, they put forward, the Innu First Nation put forward their law for the recognition of the Magpie River, and the regional Quebecois municipality put forward their law for the recognition of the Magpie River, and they have the same language, but they were both put in their own jurisdictions to recognize each other's sovereignty. When this happened, many folks, sometimes Quebec can be seen as a very conservative area. Many folks, and sometimes all of Canada, many folks thought that this was going to be struck down. It was going to see a lot of backlash from local townships and from the broader provincial leaders. And it has not. We're 4 years past its passing. And I attribute that through the literature and science and research that I've done to the prior work they did, having those conversations and building a path of duality and plurality that recognized each jurisdiction and did so through a living embodiment of peace and friendship. And so this is a wonderful model if folks are thinking about doing this. And this is also a very large wild river. So the river context and the riparian context matters. So when we think about status quo in the context of rights for rivers, our status quo shows that rivers are over-diverted. And probably we think about that in the context of our lakes as well. We've all had to deal with the rapid and ever-changing scope of what navigable waters mean, which maybe they don't mean anything anymore. Destructive dams have been encouraged throughout our history, particularly in the United States, and rivers have often been seen as property without a voice in the legal system. So a Rights for Rivers initiative or law recognizes that the river has a right to flow. It ensures the health of the entire watershed, not navigable waters, and dams are discouraged or prohibited, and rivers are often seen as persons with a seat at the table. So where we've seen this further amplified around our world is through Indigenous law and Indigenous leadership. And so we've seen Indigenous nations go for constitutional amendments, like the Ho-Chunk Nation has a rights of nature recognition in their constitution. Most recently, the Rappahannock Nation out of Virginia, they are named for the Rappahannock River, and the Rappahannock River is named for them. They are one and the same, and that is their ancestor. And they revised their constitution to recognize the Rappahannock River as a legal person within their constitution. But sometimes constitutional amendments, whether you're a tribal nation or the United States, might be a little bit too far to start with. So you have to start somewhere. So tribal council resolutions, like we saw with the Klamath River, which was a recognition done by the Yurok tribe in 2019. We've seen intertribal organization resolutions. Folks like Glitwick, I don't believe has done one yet, but we've seen resolutions in support of the rights of nature from the National Congress of American Indians. And we also have seen Indigenous nations lean into our treaty responsibilities. We still have the inherent right to form treaties with one another, with others. And so many tribes have actually formed treaties for the protection of natural beings, like the Northern Tribes Buffalo Treaty, a treaty between nations that span the northern border and are looking to protect buffalo for future generations. There are also ways to advance this in the courts, if you've got the right temperament. And then we also have seen folks create replicable models, so water declarations. So I want to share with you what some of these look like. So the White Earth Nation in 2017 recognized the rights of Menomin and have been implementing that law since 2017, have been utilizing it in support of the protection of habitats from pipeline proliferation and other types of major project developments that would impact wild rice habitats like those that we heard earlier today. We also had in 2020, the Menominee Nation recognized the inherent rights of the Menominee River. And what we see oftentimes with this Indigenous leadership is there is that sacred bond, there is that storied connection to the natural world that is being uplifted in law. For the Menominee, their creation story is very much connected to this river. Also, north of the imagined border, we have a wonderful example out of Cumberland House Cree Nation. This is a declaration, a different type of Indigenous law than a tribal code like you might see here in the States. And the Cumberland House, they affirmed Indigenous governance over water and lands for the Saskatchewan River Delta. And some interesting language from their declaration. We uphold our jurisdiction and responsibilities to protect the river. We will apply our traditional knowledge to heal the damage that has already been done. And this declaration is made in accordance with the customary and natural laws of our people. So if you start to think about maybe how your local municipality, your township might write a law to protect water, you might start to see some differences from how Indigenous peoples approach law. One of the cases I also really love to share in the context of the Great Lakes is this Anishinaabe water law, the Treaty 3 Nebe Declaration out of Grand Council Treaty 3. This was actually an initiative led by Indigenous women, water carriers, and carers, and grandmothers. So in this particular instance, the guardianship body that gets to speak for the water is a council of grandmothers from Treaty 3, so Anishinaabe grandmothers. It asserts water as a living being. It says that we all have a sacred relationship with Nebe. It upholds Anishinaabe responsibilities to protect water for future generations. And it calls on all governments to respect Indigenous water governance. So really interesting law coming out of that portion of Canada. And then we're starting to see a lot of this movement catch on at a state level. So for the Great Lakes, we had the Lake Erie Bill of Rights that was passed in 2019. How many folks are familiar with the Lake Erie Bill of Rights? Oh, you didn't hear it. I didn't actually see many hands go up. Well, this was a major Bill of Rights that was put through by the city of Toledo in 2019. It was a citizen-led initiative recognizing that Lake Erie is a legal person with inherent rights to exist, thrive, and evolve and be protected. Unfortunately, that legal backlash, it slammed hard on the city of Toledo. And through about 5 years or so of litigation, it was recently overturned by the courts last year, and so is no longer good law. But it really built momentum around the recognition of the legal personality of the Great Lakes, and more so the inherent rights of the lakes to be protected. Around the same time before the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, those grandmothers and water walkers that I mentioned earlier, like Grandmother Josephine, they worked with a member of parliament in the Canadian Parliament to put forward a personhood bill for the Great Lakes. It was proposed, it never got taken up on the floor, but there are other initiatives right now on the Canadian side to recognize the Great Lakes as legal persons. And currently, as of 2021, and then more recently revised and reintroduced, the state legislature for New York has introduced a bill to recognize all of the Great Lakes and all water bodies throughout the state of New York as having inherent rights that are to be protected. So some really interesting things happening that you might actually see other jurisdictions in the Great Lakes region honoring these waters in coming years. So what does that mean for us closer to home? Well, I wanted to kind of end with this case. I think it's fitting because we started with this amazing film about the challenges facing Indigenous nations here in the Great Lakes, here in Wisconsin, and particularly facing Monoman. And this is not just for this part of the state or the world, it's throughout the whole Great Lakes region and all of the Monoman throughout this region. And so it's also being impacted in Minnesota. And so there is a grassroots, Indigenous-led, but also just citizen-led bill out of Minnesota through the state legislature for the Rights of Monoman bill. It was introduced in April 2024. It's going through periods of revision right now, and we are really hopeful, having a lot of positivity, optimism, that this is going to get passed in the next few months. And so we may have our first Rights of Monoman state legislative bill for this region, which is very exciting. So if some of the things I shared with you today are of interest, you have the Eco-Jurisprudence Monitor where you can see all the different types of earth law initiatives that have emerged in recent years. But maybe you're like, okay, well, I'm on board. I think this is great. What do I do? Well, colleagues at the Earth Law Center created something called the Earth Law Portal. You can go to earthlawportal.org, you can scan this QR code, and it's kind of like a legal Zoom for the planet. So what that means is if you need a template for your city council or township for a resolution to recognize a river or a lake, or you want to put out a declaration, something maybe a little bit softer than a binding resolution law, all of those templates live on this portal for you to peruse, download, and fill in with your details. Beyond that, there's also letter campaigns. So we go back to that regional poll. People said they wanted to volunteer, contact an official. Contacting an official is easy as letter writing, and there are many templates available on the portal to support that. So as we close out, my thoughts here to leave you with, see if it will progress. We've made it through almost the end, which is great. There we go. My thoughts here to leave you with are those that we began our conversation today with Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer. Knowing that you love the earth changes you. It activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. So we all need to think about our words, to think about our actions, and to show gratitude to the planet so that it can respond with love. Miigwech, Tabutni, thank you. Looking forward to questions. Okay.
Stealing this mic, as is a Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers partnership tradition, we do welcome questions from the audience. So what we do is ask people to raise their hand, and then myself and I have one other helper who's a runner with a microphone will allow you to ask a question, and we'll also be engaging our virtual audience to see if they have questions as well. And it looks like Aaron already has someone ready to go.
I understand the ethics of the Native American communities, and I'm dealing with them. I managed lakes for over 30 years, but we've come to a point that the state of Wisconsin, we have accumulated laws to protect nature, but as you brought up, these laws aren't always reactive to what we need to save nature. And now we have Glyphwick, of course, which is controversial in northern Wisconsin. That essentially is the Department of Natural Resources of our Indian nations. And they're looking at a great perspective, and thank God they have the power of being a sovereign nation to make decisions and question. But the question is the legal situation that we're running into to try to correct things ecologically. Okay, and we've got a strong thing in Wisconsin. It's called Elder Leopold in the land ethic. So many of our laws and our conservation department has been developed in Wisconsin based on, in the 70s, we argued, is it laws that are going to save your lake or nature, or is it ethics? Now we have a combination in Wisconsin because of these rights of indigenous to correct the situation. But we have a problem of trying to overwater law. We have problems that are in place that are actually habit, even science in nature that doesn't help us solve problems. So I got a question. I'm making a statement. Okay, I agree with you, and a lot of people in this lake agree with you, lake associations, and I've been associated with it from the beginning. So I understand what we're trying to do. Please keep it up. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the statement. And, sometimes in these troubling times, we have to work from where we have power and control. And so although I mentioned law broadly, and sometimes we immediately go to jurisdictions that are our state, our county, our township, et cetera, you have laws as well that govern your organization or organizations that you're a part of, bylaws, things like that. And I've seen some really innovative ways that folks are implementing what they want to see at an organizational level, maybe even before they go beyond to these broader jurisdictions. So I really take your comment. It's a fantastic comment and statement, and just find your pocket of peace where you can do good work, and it matters.
Hi.
Hi.
I really appreciated the way you laid out and told the story of kind of the restructuring for the rights of nature and Indigenous law. And I followed each step, but was really curious if you had examples where guardianship is assigned or how that process goes. That last piece is still one that is hard to envision across the range of topics that come. And I just wondered if you could give an example or more information on how is that vision looking in terms of who, how, and in a legal sense, what does that standing look like?
Yeah, excellent question. So again, a restatement, guardianship, localized, context specific. So it looks different in every case example or initiative. I do like the Nebe Treaty 3 declaration because although in that instance, it was many folks, many Anishinaabe that were coming together and chiefs throughout the Grand Council, Treaty 3 Chiefs Council, that were coming together to build that resolution and led by an Indigenous women and youth in large part. Once they had built the declaration, they then also went through a process of determining guardianship. And so it was through processes of meetings and having council and ceremony that they then determined for them, and this is an Indigenous model, that the guardians would be a council of Indigenous grandmothers. And so that was sort of the process that they went through. In non-Indigenous contexts, for Indigenous contexts, I generally see that being the case. For where it's a joint initiative like the Whanganui River, they set up trustees from each of the jurisdictions, if you will. So there are trustees from the iwi and there are trustees from the government of New Zealand who serve on a guardianship board, if you would call it, that speak on behalf of the river, adjudicate things that are related to the river and its rights. We've also seen in other contexts for like local townships or city resolutions, things of that nature. Again, folks will have conversations about who they think should be represented. They've set out different types of criteria. Sometimes it might be that you have to spend a certain amount of days in nature per year or on a lake per year. Sometimes it's also about in the US, sometimes we don't like to talk about age, but age actually matters when we think about that sacred bond. It matters in terms of what we've heard of wanting to have youth and young people, those that are very close to that natal connection to water and they haven't lost it. And so that's one way that folks have thought about populating their guardianship body. And then also elders, because the storied amount of time on this planet gives you immense amount of wisdom and connection to the natural world. And so lots of ways to populate a guardianship body, but the first and most important step is conversation. It's a democratized process. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to point out too, we had a conversation at this conference 2 years ago around the public trust doctrine. And a piece of that conversation was about having an office of the public intervener, it was called in Wisconsin. And that office was dissolved in the 1990s. But I really feel like if we dusted off the paperwork and thought again about what did it mean to have a public intervener, an office that basically could sue on behalf of a lake or a river. That was almost ahead of its time, it seems. And hopefully we can keep this conversation going and think about ways to reinvigorate or recreate the office of public intervener. It's really up to all of us to have those conversations with lawmakers and others to see if that's a possibility. I'm going to check with Sarah and see if there's any questions on the chat. And then Paul over here has someone with a question.
Thanks again for your presentation. It was very, very enlightening. I was wondering if you were close enough to what happened in Erie, where you said the Court of Appeals overthrew it. What was the court's reason for overthrowing it? Do you know?
Oh, that is an excellent question. I was not close enough to the case, and it's been a while since I've read the opinion. So I wouldn't want to misquote it. Some of our colleagues that have really been on the ground amplifying that work and helping with the state bill for the legislature in New York is CELDIF. So the Council Environmental Defense Legal Fund, I think. But if you just put in CELDIF and Lake Erie into Google, Tish Odell is one of their main staff members, and they are just brilliant, always willing and open to have conversations with folks. I believe, if I'm just kind of pulling it out, but we'd have to fact check, I think it was something that they didn't believe that the city had the authority to issue that bill, that it was circumventing the state's authority.
And I think that's going to be a challenge. A lot of places, like it'll be a local government, a local community that feels like they have figured something out and they want to advance it, but it maybe has impacts for other governments, for other municipalities, for other jurisdictions, maybe other states. So that is a good reason to think about scaling it up, always thinking at the state or national level.
Yeah, scaling it up, coalition building. Again, I think the legislative bills that are coming out of New York and Minnesota are really promising in terms of how they've built their coalitions and learning from the Lake Erie scenario and trying to have the most authority possible in moving forward. But it doesn't negate the work of local townships, right? Because even if something that a local township or a city does is struck down, you're a part of a larger movement building that might lead to a state bill later on. But I would be remiss not to say as well that in these current times, you do have to keep an eye on your representatives, both at the state and federal levels, maybe not so much the federal, but definitely the state, for preemption bills, bans on earth law, ecocentric law movements. We've seen those come out at the state level in Florida and Utah. So there are no rights of nature laws allowed in the states of Florida or Utah unless led by Indigenous Nations who are sovereign and not subject to those state laws.
I believe we have time for one more question. Someone has it. Oh, I got a person right here. So, around the mic.
I was just curious about the intention of eliminating dams, because we have so many impounded lakes in Wisconsin, and small towns have them, large towns have them. In fact, I think like Pettenwell and some of those kind of lakes are all. So anyway, what do you feel is the future then for the existing lakes that we have that are impounded?
Yes, so for impounded lakes, I think that is going to be a big part of what we see in the next 10 to 20 years. I think we are going to see decommissioning of impoundments, dams, et cetera. We're already seeing that on the West Coast, and I think a good portion of Maine. Maine has led a lot of decommissioning of dams, both for impoundments for rivers and lakes. And then also on the West Coast, lots of things happening in California. I mentioned the Klamath River received recognition as a legal person by the Yurok tribe, but it also has gone through massive dam decommissioning, which has allowed for the return of salmon. And so I think that in the next 2 decades, we will see a lot. We'll see a lot more removal than we have before, because we didn't really remove a lot of things. But we know now, the science has shown us that in that removal and restoration, we are able to better support habitats and aquatic life, which is critical for the maintenance and restoration of biodiversity, which is one of the pillars outside of carbon emissions that we need to address climate change. So I think that's going to be a strategy moving forward, although we're in difficult times, fiscal resources, things that were infrastructure based to allow for that decommissioning, repurposing, re-engineering of spaces are being defunded. And so it's going to be challenging, but I think the benefits it holds for ecosystem health overall are going to be the drivers of how we continue to see that happen and maybe occur through private funding. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and some of that may not happen overnight. It's going to maybe take a place over the course of decades and maybe even into centuries. But I would point out, like in Western Minnesota last summer, some of you might remember, there was an older dam and a flooding event happened. The dam was overwhelmed. The water went around the dam and essentially destroyed it. Now the question is, what do we do? And I think having this context of thinking about, well, wait a minute, do we really need to replace this dam? Can we afford to replace the dam? And is this dam really desirable in this place? And I think in Michigan, there was another set of lakes actually where, again, a climate-driven storm event wiped out the dams, and they're still struggling to figure out what exactly do we want to do with these places. So those questions, it's not even always about, oh, let's go decommission a dam. Sometimes it's about, okay, the dam has been destroyed by nature in a sense. What do we want to do now? So
such a strong and immensely valid point. Sitting on the U.S. National Climate Assessment, these types of extreme precipitation events, these storm events, they are going to increase. They are going to become more frequent. They are not going away. And so that actually is probably more the use case scenario that everyone in this room is going to be facing, is when a dam is no longer operable, what do we do? How do we restore that habitat?
All right. We do have to get going because we're going to have to clear this room out, and we're also going to have to cover a couple of more housekeeping notes. But I want to ask you all once again to give a warm Wisconsin thank you Miigwech to our speaker. Thank you so much, Kelsey. And now I'm going to invite Sarah, my colleague, Sarah Winju, to come up and give us some housekeeping notes, important things to keep in mind. And we're also going to talk about some of the features in this room.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? All right, welcome. It's so good to see you all. Okay, because my daughter is going to take a speech class. I have to give her my perspective real quick. I want her to know it's okay to talk in front of a large group of people. So real quick, please eat a muffin or a pastry on your table. We will be talking a little bit about this later, but we do compost. We will be composting all of the food waste, but I'd really like there to be not a lot of food waste. And they're setting out. So if you don't eat one now, take one with you for later. College students, take 4. All right, so there are dozens of people that have been involved in the planning process for this event. And I wanted to take a moment just to recognize them. There were over 40 on the planning team alone. We've met monthly for a year, more than monthly for some of you. If I could have each of you who volunteered, were part of the planning committee, just to stand up, I'd really like to truly thank you for your involvement, your time, your effort, your hard work, your ideas. Anyone involved in the planning? Thank you so much. If you haven't already, please stop by the Extension Lakes table. We do have a token of appreciation for all of our volunteers. Planning for 2026 starts now. So if you're interested in joining the planning team for next year, please stop by, let me know, send me an email. We'd love to have your ideas and help for next year. Presenters too, I wanted to give a big thanks to our presenters. We had over 140 presenters this year. So those were workshop presenters, lightning talk presenters, poster presenters, special sessions, concurrent sessions. So please, any presenters, all of you, can you please stand up, because we wouldn't be at this convention without our speakers. So thank you. I also want to say quick, all these thank yous. So many people are involved in this event. So AVM, our audio and visual people who are behind the screen here, but set up all of our technology. Thank you to them as well. Also, I want to thank UWSP Continuing Education. They're the ones that did all of the registration and thankfully printed out the name tags so we didn't have to do that. So thank you to Continuing Ed as well. All right. We want to be sure that everyone is able to attend this statewide learning and networking event, regardless of cost or distance or a whole host of other reasons. Our goal is to bring people together from communities across Wisconsin to strengthen our partnership to protect our waters. The scholarships that you provide help us do that. So I wanted to just quickly say that 15 of you donated to our scholarship fund through the registration process. Donated almost $1,200, and that supported 10 individuals to attend, many of them students. So thank you for your generosity, and welcome to those who are here with a scholarship. We're glad you could be with us today. So thank you for that. Similarly, we've taken on the challenge, again, of coordinating a dual audience event, so both in person and virtual. This is the 4th year in a row that we've done this. Our virtual audience is over 50 people right now that are joining us from all over the country. They can't be with us for one reason or another. So we're glad you could be here and join us virtually. We want to be inclusive by providing equal access to opportunities and the resources for people who might otherwise be excluded, whether it be by distance or other circumstances. And we want to be purposeful in our strive for equity by providing various levels of support and assistance so that everyone, regardless of specific needs and abilities, are able to participate in this convention. And the practice of including and involving people from a range of different backgrounds makes our partnership stronger and our work more impactful. So thank you. A quick shout out to the team last night for their victory at Pictionary. Milfoilers, are you here? They're too tired. They're probably not awake yet. All right. Also, quick, I want to draw your attention to the front cover of your agenda where you can find information about Goose Chase. Goose Chase is an app that allows you to complete fun missions for points. So if you're not already participating and you want to, there's more information on your agenda. Virtual participants, you can play too. First place is registration to next year's convention. Second place, free workshop for next year. Third place is a gift certificate to our Extension Lakes bookstore. And there's a lot of competition going on right now, so it'll be interesting to see who wins. Another fun, the convention isn't just presentations and information, right? We like to make it social, fun, competitive. In your agenda is also a word crossword puzzle. And the instructions are in there as well. You may see some large words hanging around common areas, and that will help you in your you filling out your puzzle. If you finish your word puzzle, bring it to our Extension Lakes table and you can be entered into a drawing for prizes. We'll be drawing prizes at 4:30 this afternoon, I think, and again tomorrow. So 2 drawings. All right, finally. Well, maybe not finally. Sorry, I'll get you out of here. Lake Tides is turning 50. How many of you get Lake Tides publication delivered to your inbox or your mailbox? Okay. Well, we are celebrating 50 years this year, and we have a display on the wall over here that has the front cover of every issue for the last 50 years. So please take some time to look at that display. And if you don't receive Lake Tides, we have information about how you can get that. All right. Banquet. The banquet is tonight. If you're not already registered, there are still tickets available. You know if you're registered because you will have a ticket in your name tag. It says Admit 1 Stewardship. So we look forward to recognizing our award winners tonight and having a great dinner. That starts at 6 o'clock, so register before 5:30 if you're not already registered. The next session starts at 10:40, 8 minutes, grab a muffin, and then we'll see you back here at lunch at 12:15.